So we were just talking about how this is the perfect time of year for this presentation with being in the middle of the holiday season, and many of us will be having larger gatherings this year, either hosting people and preparing large meals, or maybe you're taking food to a gathering and have more leftovers than you would during the average week when you're just cooking for yourself or your family. And I will say that if you have turkey left over from Thanksgiving last week, it's probably time to throw that away. It's been it's going on a week now, so probably not safe to eat. So if you're in that boat, my apologies. But this webinar will give you some tips to maybe prevent that from happening the next time around if you find that you have egregious amounts of food left over after your next holiday celebration. So tonight we'll be talking about reducing food waste at home. So, there are multiple levels to the food chain. We're not really going to talk a whole lot about, what retail and other points along the chain can do to reduce food waste. This is really about what you can do as a consumer yourself at home to reduce food waste without compromising food safety. So sometimes there's a little bit of a trade-off or a tension there. We want you to prevent foodborne illness. So we want to prevent food waste with food safety in mind. And so I'll share tonight some ways that you can store items, not only for safety and quality, but increased shelf life to prevent food waste. And Jessica already shared some links in the chat box for you to resources that I'll reference this evening. I'll go ahead and reshare the first one because I already have that one copied and pasted, ready to go. This is a publication, a fact sheet from Kansas State University. Their food safety field specialist authored this fact sheet, and I used it when I developed this presentation. So if you're wanting to follow along, take notes, or have a resource you can refer back to after tonight, that's a really good one that provides a good summary of what we'll talk about this evening in just a couple of pages. And I was able to attend a presentation that Dr. Londa gave earlier this year, back in the spring, and it was specifically about that tension between food safety and food waste, and how that's sometimes a balancing act. But before we go any farther, I do want to establish a common definition of food waste. So just so we're all on the same page, and I'll invite you, if you're comfortable, to open up your chat box and share what food waste means to you. What comes to mind when you hear food waste? Yeah, I see throwing away spoiled food. The basic definition I'll share this evening is edible food that's discarded and going uneaten. So it could be, buying the wrong things, too much of something. So it might be the wrong item, it might be the wrong quantity, or just not storing it properly, you end up throwing it away. In essence, it is things going bad before they're consumed, or not using the food that we buy. So whatever the reason, whether you bought too much, you just didn't use it, it's edible food that goes uneaten. So it might be an item like the fresh produce you see here that just spoils before it's eaten. Or it could be, a dish that you've prepared, the leftovers that you just prepared too much and you end up throwing it away before it's consumed because it's no longer safe to consume. So whatever the reason, it's just edible food that is thrown into the trash. And in the United States, about 21%, so a fifth of our waste stream, everything that goes into the landfill is food waste. And that's actually a larger portion of this graph than any other category. So paper is about 15%, plastics is 18%. Another big one there is the rubber, leather, and textiles at 11%, and then the rest are all less than 10%. Food waste is 21%. So that's a lot of food going into the landfill. And here in Franklin County, we do a little bit better. So Franklin County, SWACO, the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, has an initiative to reduce food waste, to cut it in half by 2030. And so in Franklin County, it's about 15% of our waste stream. So still a significant proportion of the landfill, but better than the national average. And SWACO does have a really nice website, SaveMoreThanFood.org, where you can learn about that initiative. They have some resources and tips, and it was shared in the chat earlier, but if we have time at the end, and I'm pretty sure we will, I'll actually pull it up and show you what is there on that website. Whoops, hit the wrong button. All right, so about 21% of the waste stream is food waste. How much of the food supply do you think goes to waste? So if you think about all the food supply in the United States, what percentage of that do you think is wasted? You can put your guess in the chat box there. And yes, I'm aware that if you weren't here at the very beginning, you can't see that link. It was there so that it was captured in the transcript, and we'll make sure to share them again at the end. What percent of the food supply do you think is wasted? You see 20%, 12%. It's higher than both of those guesses. 35%. 35 is about right. So the estimate, depending on where you live in the United States, is 30 to 40%. So 30 to 40% of our food supply goes to waste. So that equates to 133 billion pounds for the entire nation, which translates into something along the lines of $161 billion. And then if you do the math, that divides out to about $1,500 on average per family of four, or $375 per person. And this data is a little bit dated. The infographic that is referenced here comes from the USDA based on 2015 data, and it refers specifically to food waste at the consumer level. So that's why the 90 billion pounds doesn't quite add up to that 133. This is at the consumer level alone, about 90 billion pounds of food is wasted, which is, if you're a visual person, about 123 Empire State Buildings. Or another visual that I've heard shared is it's enough to fill a football stadium every day. It's enough calories to meet a person's nutrition needs per day, just at the consumer level. And in Franklin County, nearly 1 million pounds of food waste arrive at the landfill each day. So that's about 5 pounds per resident per week. Even though we're doing better than the national average, it's still a lot going into our landfill. And it has economic costs. So, of course, there's the, the sustainability consequences of that space in the landfill, but it also costs us a lot of money. We're literally throwing money into the trash, costing almost $1 per person per day on average. And a lot of that comes from protein foods because our meats, for example, tend to be more expensive than other types of food. And they do spoil. So if you don't use them in time before they spoil, then you end up throwing them away. And of course, other perishable things like fresh fruits and vegetables also add up, and the dairy as well. So a common culprit of dairy food that's wasted is milk when it is people dispose of it when the date on the carton is past its printed date. And we'll talk a little bit more about the labeling later. Another image I found is dated. This comes from a New York Times article in 2008, so over a decade ago, but it really was powerful to me, just the depiction of an average family's monthly waste. And I look at that and think, wow, there's no way I would hope that my family wastes this much food in a month. But this is the depiction supposedly of the average family's waste. And with children, it's a challenge. One challenge is, when you have young children, especially, you're wanting to expose them to a variety of foods to encourage healthy eating. And then there's that trade-off, they're not going to eat everything. It takes multiple exposures to learn to like a food. You end up wasting that. So there's that trade-off there. But still, this seems like a lot. So interesting photo. And as you can tell, or as you may, already be thinking, it's not just the monetary cost that you're throwing away. It's not just the space in the landfill, it's the wasted resources that go into the production of this food, the labor, the land, the water, and everything involved in not only producing, but sometimes processing and transporting. And then by the time it gets to our homes, storage, refrigerator storage, preparation. So lots of wasted energy by the time it makes it all the way to the consumer level. So the EPA has a food recovery hierarchies that they have created to strategize. How do we manage? How do we reduce our food waste? And they have these priorities that probably sound familiar. It may take you back to your grade school days when we learned about solid waste reduction, reduce, reuse, and recycle. It's the same 3 R's when we're talking about food waste. So the priority, the best strategy in reducing our own food waste is source reduction. If we can start to eliminate the amount of food we're bringing into our homes or that we're preparing that we don't anticipate using, that's the best way to reduce our food waste. So that's really what we're going to focus most on tonight. I will say that, another strategy in that reduce tier is feeding hungry people. So this is donating food to food pantries or soup kitchens or so forth. And sometimes, that's nice if you have, canned items, for example. But usually it's not the canned items that are leading to our food waste, right? It's tends to be more the fresh things that we just don't use in time, or the dishes we've already prepared. So something to keep in mind if you are donating food is that you don't want to donate something you wouldn't eat yourself, something that is past date, no longer safe, something that's been open or repackaged, damaged or dented. If you don't want to eat it, if you wouldn't feel comfortable eating it, you wouldn't donate it for someone else. And another consideration is that not every facility that accepts donations has adequate storage to take perishable items. Oftentimes, they would prefer the monetary donations over the actual food items. The food pantries have more buying power going directly to wholesale versus retail, so they can make the monetary donations go farther. So just a couple things to keep in mind. Sometimes donating food that you won't be able to use is a great strategy, but it's not the best strategy in this tier. Reusing food, sometimes not necessarily at the consumer level as much, but sometimes food can be reused as animal feed or industrially to create other things. And then at the bottom is recycling. So composting could be a strategy to keep food out of the landfill if it's no longer safe to eat. There are some great extension resources on composting, and SWATco has some resources on composting as well if you're interested in learning more about that. It's just not something that we'll get into in any detail tonight. We are going to focus mostly on the source reduction. And before I give you some strategies, again, I'll open up the floor, open up the chat box and ask, what are some ideas you have? What are some things that you do to try to perhaps reduce food waste? And if you don't have ideas, if you're here to learn, then that's great as well. Certainly glad to have you here. But what are anyone have any ideas or strategies that you do as a consumer or at home to try to limit or reduce food waste? Awesome. I see meal planning, making a shopping list from your meal plan, reducing the number of places you shop. That's an interesting strategy. Yeah. Freezing. A few people have said freezing. That is a great strategy. Yeah. So these are all things certainly that can help reduce food waste, starting with the meal planning. So when you're meal planning, you want to shop your refrigerator and your pantry first to see what you already have on hand that might need to be used up, whether it be, fresh fruits and vegetables that are going bad, that will go bad soon, or meat that needs to be used up. Even sometimes checking on things like yogurt or cheese. Are there items like that perhaps that you may need to incorporate into a meal before they reach their end? And there is a really nice resource called savethefood.com, and it's listed in my slides later on, but I just mention it here. They have some nice tools. They have what they call a meal planning mate. If you are just looking for some sort of a meal planning tool or app, that might be one to check out. They also have a tool called the Guestimator. So if you're hosting an event, it's a little bit of a larger gathering than what you would typically cook for. It helps you estimate how much you might need for that event. So for example, I was listening to the radio just last week actually with Thanksgiving, or it might have been earlier this week, and someone was sharing that they doubled a recipe for green bean casserole and used 8 cans of green beans because they thought that they would need to double the recipe, and brought almost the entire thing home. And sometimes it's kind of tricky to, guesstimate how much you might need if you're cooking for a larger crowd. So a tool like that could be helpful. If you're used to cooking for your own family, you probably get an idea of how much you need to cook. And sometimes, other source reduction strategies like learning to reduce recipes or cook for 1 or 2 or freeze meals might be better strategies for you if you're in that space. One note on the meal planning is if you plan how you're going to use leftovers, you want to make sure that you're reheating your leftovers to a safe temperature. The recommendation is 165 degrees. And eat them within a few days. So 3 to 5 days. If it gets to a week, then like I said earlier, if you still have your Thanksgiving turkey left over, it's time to throw that away. It's no longer safe to eat at this point. Strategy that goes kind of hand in hand with meal planning is our strategic grocery shopping. So once you've identified the meals that you want to make for your week, then you can write a shopping list based on what you need for those meals, so that you're not, doing impulse buys when you go to the grocery store. You're not buying, extra things that then you either don't use, or perhaps you have, you use in place of other things that then go to waste. Especially if you're someone who's kind of, attracted to the sale items or what you see in the store, then looking at the circulars beforehand and creating a list might be a good strategy. Or limiting yourself to one store. That's an interesting strategy that someone brought up. So trying to be a little bit more strategic with your shopping list and your grocery shopping. And that's not to say that, if you see something on sale, you can't deviate from it. Certainly if you see something that's marked down, it could be a good way to save money and even reduce the store's waste. So, for example, I like to look for the stir fry kits in the fresh produce section that are marked down. And then by buying those, the store doesn't end up having to throw those away. But if I buy something like that, then it's going to be in place of another meal probably. So I'm not buying 2 things that one would then be thrown out. And if you're someone who, you just don't have a great track record of using your fresh produce before it goes bad, then maybe buying frozen vegetables to have on hand would be a better strategy because they don't spoil. They keep in the freezer for much, much longer. Another strategy is storing food properly. So keeping perishable foods cold, knowing what to store in the refrigerator versus what to leave out. And there's a lot of resources out there to help you store foods properly from Extension, and I'll share a couple of those towards the end. But here's a quick quiz question for you. What temperature should you keep your home refrigerator at or below? So if you want to type the answer or type your guess in the chat box, hopefully it's not too tricky. What temperature should you keep your refrigerator at or below for safety and quality? Yes, it is 40 degrees. So you want to keep your home refrigerator at or below 40 degrees. And then you want to keep your home freezer at or below 0 degrees. Foods that are stored in the freezer at 0 degrees or below will remain safe indefinitely. The quality might deteriorate a little bit over time. So we do recommend using your frozen foods, especially if it's fresh produce that you freeze, using that within a year for best quality, although it will be safe indefinitely. And you also want to, keep your refrigerator and your freezer clean to help eliminate odors, seeping into foods, not necessarily spoiling them, but creating off taste, perhaps, and use packaging that's designed for storing food, especially in the freezer. So if you're storing food in the freezer, you want to use containers, plastic containers, or bags, or you can use glass containers. Of course, there's the risk of them breaking, but you want to use containers that are designed for freezer storage, as opposed to like reusing something like a butter tub or a mayonnaise jar. Those kind of things are really only designed for single use, and they will allow, air to enter or odors to enter and cause the food to, it would still be safe, but it just wouldn't be high quality. Another thing you can do to reduce your food waste is extend the life of it, either by freezing it for later, cooking it for later, incorporating it into another dish. So for example, if you have fresh fruit that's starting to go bad, maybe making muffins or a baked good out of that. Or if you have vegetables, you could make a soup, or saute them and do a pasta dish or casserole or something like that. You can freeze things for later. Although the caveat there is, keep in mind that food preservation, like freezing, preserves the food as it is. It does not improve the quality. So if it's already on its last legs, you wouldn't want to freeze a brown banana, for example, maybe using that for baking or a smoothie, or freezing it to use in a baked good or a smoothie would work. But you wouldn't want to, freeze something that's already going bad to use, like in a more fresh style dish later. But you can freeze things if you make a big batch of soup or casserole or a main dish and you won't eat it before it goes bad. You can definitely freeze a portion of that. A lot of products like, bread can be frozen for later. So if you anticipate not using something, meat, chicken, whatever it may be, maybe freezing it from the onset is a good strategy. And I actually will even chop, if I buy celery, for example, this time of year, I make a lot of soup. And so I'll buy celery and I will go ahead and cut it and freeze it in individual 1 cup portions so that I can pull those out when I'm making soup. And that way my celery will last for multiple batches of soup, whereas if I leave it in the fridge, it would go bad after just a couple. And then the last thing I'll mention here is understanding the dates, understanding labeling, which can be a little bit tricky. The only federally regulated dates on our packages are actually those that are on infant formula. So if you see a sell-by date, the sell-by tells the store how long to display the product for sale. If you see best by, that is what is recommended for best flavor or quality. It's not a safety date. It doesn't have to do with food safety. It has to do more with quality. And then the use by date is the last date recommended by the manufacturer for use of the product while it's at peak quality. So most of that labeling has more to do with quality than food safety. There's nothing magical that happens when a food hits its date on its label. And the companies, food manufacturers, may do their own research and testing to determine what dates to print. but it's not a hard and fast rule that whenever a food hits that date on its label, that it can no longer be used. So that's something to keep in mind, especially with things like the eggs and milk. Oftentimes those products are still good beyond their date. And you just have to use your senses and your common sense as a consumer. If it smells off or it looks off, then don't use it. If it's a couple of days past its date, it is very well probably still safe to use. And there are some nice resources and apps if you want a little bit of help, trying to keep track of what is in your refrigerator so that you do use them while they are still at peak quality before they're beyond their recommended use or the date that's printed on their label. One is the Food Keeper app. So if you like using an app to try to keep inventory of what's in your refrigerator and freezer and pantry, and pull it all together for meal planning, that might be one to explore. Save the Food is one that I mentioned, has those nice meal planning tools and recipes and tips. Things like, making broth or making baked goods with those produce items that may be on their last legs. And then there are some nice extension charts for proper storage, for what should you keep in the refrigerator versus not, how long will something last in the refrigerator, both from Kansas, as I mentioned at the beginning. I referenced the work of that food safety specialist from Kansas in creating this presentation, as well as from Ohio State. So you can search Ohio State resources at ohioline.osu.edu. And I'll go ahead and show you the charts that are from Kansas. I like these over the ones from Ohio State because they're so colorful. They're just a little bit more appealing if it's something that you would want to print off to have to reference, for example. So I'll copy that link into the chat for your reference. But you can scroll down. This one is on food storage in the refrigerator and freezer, and it's broken down by categories. So breads, pastries, cakes. You can see, most of your bread products can be frozen. It tells you about how long they can be left in the freezer. Again, the recommendations for freezer storage are mostly for quality versus safety, but you can still get months out of something if you put it in the freezer. Same with dairy products. You can freeze your butter or margarine, most cheeses. We actually, when our office was shut down last March, we did freeze when we found out we were going to have to go home. We froze everything in our kitchen for demonstration purposes that we could. And we have a lot of butter in our freezer now. So I can attest that butter does freeze just fine. Fruits and juices, as well as vegetables. And the nice thing about these charts is they'll tell you, about how long something will keep well in the refrigerator. You'll see notes here, like for your onions, potatoes, and sweet potatoes. Those do best when they're left out at room temperature. You do not want to refrigerate those. And tomatoes will do best when you ripen them at room temperature. And then you can refrigerate them. So just some tips for your fresh produce, if that's something that you struggle with. Another tip that I've heard someone, a colleague shared, is that she likes to use clear or glass containers in her refrigerator so that she can easily see what she needs to use. before it goes bad. So even little strategies like that can be helpful. Then the other resource I promised I'd share is from SWATco. This is their Save More Than Food initiative. And they have a whole campaign to reduce food waste. So since we have a little bit of time, I thought I'd pull up this quiz and we can go through it together and test our food waste knowledge. So I think probably the easiest way to do this is if you want to open up your chat feature, you can type your guesses into the chat and we'll just go with what seems to be the consensus. So the first question is about how many pounds of food are landfilled each year in Central Ohio? And the choices are 337 million pounds, 106,000 pounds, 492 pounds, or 13 pounds. I see one guess for 106,000. Two guesses. All right, so that's what we'll go with. On average, how much money does each Central Ohio resident spend on food that they throw away each year? This one I covered, so hopefully I'll get this one right, 375. Growing the food that we eat requires a lot of water, both on the farm and in preparing food into meals. How much water is wasted in Central Ohio each year by wasting food? So we have 6 gallons per person, 30 gallons per person, 16 gallons per person, or 22 gallons per person. Oh, I see one guess for 30 and 2 for 22. We'll go with the 22. Eggs are safe to eat 3 to 5 weeks beyond their expiration date. Which of the following methods is a good way to test if your eggs are still fresh? So we have, maybe this one will do A, B, C, D. So A is as long as the insides are not blue, you're good to go. B, put it into a glass of water. If it rests at the bottom, it's still good to eat. C is put it into 2 cups of water with 2 tablespoons baking soda. After 2 minutes, if the shell's color has not changed, it's safe to eat. And then D would be prepare them however you like and see if they taste funny. Hopefully not D. I see lots of B's. All right, transporting food around our community and around our world uses a lot of energy. How much gasoline is used to transport food that Central Ohio sends to landfills each year? And again, we can do A, B, C, D. So A is enough to fly around Earth 658 times. B is enough to fill Ohio Stadium 3.5 times. C is enough to fuel 44,000 vehicles for a year. And D is enough to fuel a road trip to Alaska and back. So it looks like B is the popular answer again. Oh, these are true or false. So true or false, many wilted leafy greens can be revived by soaking them in ice water. That is true. And another true or false, if all of the potential meals that are landfilled each year in Central Ohio were recovered before the food went to waste, we would have enough to provide for every meal missed by Central Ohio residents. I'm guessing that is also true. Which of these foods should not be frozen? We have A, B, C, or D. So apples, peas, carrots, and fish can be frozen. Bread, milk, and cheese can be frozen. Lunch meat, potatoes, and mussels is choice C, or eggs in the shell and canned food is choice D. It looks like we're going with D. Some foods cannot be composted, true or false? We didn't really talk about compost tonight, but there are some nice resources from SWATco on composting, as I mentioned. And how can residents reduce food waste in their everyday lives? This one is all of the above, as we've talked about at home. Composting, shopping with a list, and freezing leftovers. So let's see how we did. Oh no, we missed the first question. So 337 million pounds of food are landfilled each year in Central Ohio. We got the cost right. We did not get the amount of gallons of water right. I know at least one person guessed 22 gallons. That was a, so that was a toss up there, but we waste a lot of water as well. We got the egg question right. Oh, we did not get the energy question right. We got all of our true and false questions right. Oh, except for composting. So that's a trick one. I don't know if their assessment is right. Some foods cannot be composted. And then their answer says avoid composting. So anyway, I think overall we got the gist of it. We got some of the questions wrong, but hopefully, you know, you have demonstrated that you've learned some of the key points I was hoping to share with you. Hopefully you got some new resources and maybe some strategies that you want to try out tonight or moving forward. So I am happy to answer any remaining questions that you have. You can also see my contact information on the screen if you want to follow up by email later if a thought occurs to you. And if you are specifically interested in food preservation, so not just freezing, but learning more about drying or canning or so forth, OSU Extension has a lot of great resources on that topic. So that's another topic you can explore. You can reach out to me or go to our website. But thank you for joining me this evening, and I'll hang out for a few minutes in case anyone does have questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. I learned a whole bunch, and I am taping some of those things to my fridge. So as a reminder for my freezer.
All right. Yeah, and I see a comment, Westerville has a great free food composting program. So SWATco has partnered with most of the cities within Franklin County to offer composting. So I live in Hilliard. I know Hilliard has one. So Upper Arlington does, Westerville does. So check that out. Go to SWATco's website if you're wanting to learn more about that. They're trying to make it easier. It's not as easy as putting it up on the street with your trash and recycling, but there is a program there and you don't have to pay for it anymore. So perhaps a little bit more effort with the drop off, but there's no cost to you as the consumer.
And I see the thing, somebody's asking me to share the link. Yes, I will find that. Also, a shameless plug, by the way. So the Westerville Library now has a poster printer. So like I'm going to take some of those sheets that you showed us on that, was it Kentucky website? And I'm going to blow that up and put it on my outdoor freezers. So you can get that done at the Westerville Library now. But let me go ahead and find that link. And if I don't find it right now, I will go ahead and include it in the email that everyone will get. If you did show up later, this is being recorded and everybody will receive a link to the recorded video as well as the transcript. So all of those links, everything that Jenny shared will be in there. At this time also, if you want to share any links, since the chat transcript will be shared, please feel free to put that in there. Oh, Marty texted it to me. Food waste composting, City of Westerville. One second. All right, and everybody again, please feel free to put any of your questions in chat. I found the news article. Thank you, Marty, but I will go ahead and include the full link to the Westerville program. All right, does anyone have any other questions? At this time, also feel free to unmute yourself if you do.
Oh yeah, I see the comment. Yeah, so you can compost your pumpkins, and actually SWACO has a on their landing page I just saw earlier today. They're calling it the Great Pumpkin Toss. So find a drop off near you. You can compost any pumpkins you may still have at your house for your fall decorations.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your participation and for attending tonight. And Jenny, thank you. This was great and timely information. We appreciate it. All right, and people are signing off. We will go ahead and call it quits. Everybody have a good night. Jenny, once again, thank you. And I will be sending you all of this, all the recordings and the chats as well. Stop recording.